Welcome back to English 111. As I discussed last week, when reading literature, scholars divide the text into groups known as literary movements based on the time period and the characteristics of the writing. During the 19th century, the major literary movement was called Romanticism. Romanticism was marked by emotion, heavy symbolism, and a focus on the individual. It tended to idealize the world, or in the case of Gothic Romanticism, offer a fantastical version of it. We saw examples of this in the stories that we read last week by Poe and Hawthorne. In The Cask of Amontillado, Poe presents you with a dark and confusing tale of murder, and he presents it from the first-person perspective of the killer. This story doesn't feature the ghosts and haunted house of many Gothic stories. Instead, Poe's horror comes from a killer who offers no reasonable reason for his action, and who invites us, the readers, into his madness. This is what we call an unreliable narrator. He's our only access to this world. He even addresses us directly, but how can we trust anything that he says? The horror of the story is that the killer is entirely human. He's just like us in a lot of ways, and yet he carefully, coldly bricks a man into a wall and leaves him to die. He even seems to enjoy listening to the pleas of his victim. Poe seems to be asking, what's the difference between a man and a monster? Hawthorne asks a similar question, but in The Birthmark, the danger doesn't stem from a sociopath bent on revenge. Instead, what leads Almer to kill, albeit unintentionally, is his obsession with perfection. He has everything he wants, a promising career and a beautiful wife, but it's not enough. His quest to outdo nature leads him to disaster, and leads his wife to her death. Hawthorne here relied heavily on symbolism, a favorite feature of Romantic writers, with the handprint on Georgiana's cheek. It's a mark of humanity, and as Almer tries to erase this mark, he also strips Georgiana of her humanity. She becomes an object to him, not a person, and he wants that object to be without flaw. But we were never meant to be perfect. This week we'll be exploring two new literary movements, Realism and Naturalism. Romanticism was prominent during the 1800s in America, but as the Civil War approached, the mood of the country changed, and with it, the literature that was being produced. Literature became didactic, focused on teaching, and even propagandistic. After the war, the country had lost any sense of idealism. Every person had in some way been affected. Many had lost friends and family members, or had even fought in the war themselves. Writers like Walt Whitman and Emily Dickinson explored these dark times and emotions through their writing, using new forms and exploring themes like death and mortality. As they did so, they began to find a voice that was uniquely American. As the country came to grips with the many changes in the aftermath of the war, the literary style became focused on depicting the world as it was. This was the beginning of the American realist movement. Realism strove to depict life objectively, trying to accurately portray settings, dialects, and situations. Realists like Mark Twain rejected the idealized situations, exotic settings, and improbable plot twists presented in Romantic literature. The realist goal was at all times to present the truth of what they saw and experienced. Kate Chopin, author of The Story of an Hour, was born in 1851 in St. Louis. Her early writings were very much in the realist mode, focused on depicting the life that she observed in the South. These works are often categorized as local color, a style of writing that relied on natural dialects and specific regional details to bring to life the world as it actually existed. As she continued her writing career, Chopin's works began to focus specifically on the experiences of women. In 1899, Chopin published her most famous piece, The Awakening, a realistic novel about the sexual and artistic awakening of a young wife and mother who abandons her family. This text was broadly condemned at the time because of its openness about sexuality and its portrayal of an interracial marriage. It was not printed again until the 1950s, when Chopin became recognized as an important American writer. As realism became the dominant literary movement in America, a subgenre known as psychological realism began to develop. Writers like Charlotte Perkins Gilman embraced the goals of realism in their writing, striving at all times for authenticity and truth. However, whereas realists like Chopin decided to explore the world around them and the individual's place within it, psychological realists took these same principles and applied them to the internal reality of life. These writers focused on the thought processes and accurate characterization of the people that they brought to life. The works of psychological realism focus largely on the inner lives of the people and can sometimes be intentionally vague, depicting characters with imperfect self-knowledge and unfulfilled yearnings. Writer and social activist Charlotte Perkins Gilman was born in 1860 in Hartford, Connecticut. Gilman had a difficult childhood. Her father abandoned the family, leaving Charlotte's mother to raise 2 children on her own. In 1884, Gilman married artist Charles Stetson. During her decade-long marriage to Stetson, Gilman experienced severe postpartum depression and underwent a series of psychological treatments for it, including a so-called rest cure, prescribed by noted psychologist Silas Ware Mitchell. The theory behind this treatment was that women suffered from hysteria and should be kept away from all stimulation. Gilman found this treatment extremely harmful to her mental health. Her concerns and objections were dismissed. She eventually sought a divorce from her husband, something that was scandalous at the time. This experience is believed to inspire her story, The Yellow Wallpaper. As realism and its cousin, psychological realism, became the dominant movements in literature, some writers began feeling a limitation in its approach of depicting the world objectively. They began to explore literature's abilities not just to explore the world, but to investigate it. And with that, they began to develop naturalism. Naturalists wanted to find and identify the underlying causes for the way people and societies acted and what they believed. Drawing on the works of Charles Darwin, they explored how heredity, social status, and environment impacted people's lives. They came to the conclusion that these forces were inescapable. We have little power to improve or affect our lot in life. This pessimistic view dismissed almost entirely the idea of free will and benevolence in the universe. Nature and the environment became almost characters in and of themselves in naturalistic writing, shaping the lives of people in ways beyond their control and often beyond their understanding. Like the realist, and especially the psychological realist, plot was very much secondary to depicting characters. Naturalists placed their characters in dire situations, exploring the ways that their birth, nature, and environment limited their response. If realists were the journalists of nature, naturalists were the scientists, using literature as a laboratory to explore the limits of mankind. Despite their interest in social ills, however, the naturalists did not argue for a change. They simply took the world as it was and sought to understand it. One of the first truly naturalist novelists in American literature, was Stephen Crane's Maggie, A Girl of the Streets, which depicted life in the slums of New York. The novel was so gritty and bleak that Crane could not find a publisher and instead had to publish it on his own. Stephen Crane was born in 1871, the son of a Methodist preacher and a reform worker. He was raised with a faith in a benevolent God, the idea of man's importance, and a belief in free will, all ideals he would later satirize in his writings. He originally planned to be a soldier and then studied to be an engineer before moving to New York, where he became a journalist and studied the lives of the hardest parts of the city. His first novel was so stark and dismal that he couldn't find a publisher, so as I said, he published it himself. Most famous for The Red Badge of Courage, the story of a Civil War soldier, is dark and satirical, focusing on realistic battles and the internal turmoil of the protagonist. Our story this week, The Open Boat, was written after Crane took part in an unsuccessful gun-running mission in Cuba. He moved to England shortly after, before succumbing to tuberculosis at the age of 28. All of the stories for this week are a reflection of the lives of the people who wrote them. But more broadly, they are also a reflection of the time and place in which these authors were living. As you read this week, ask yourself, what are these stories saying about the world in which they were created? Don't forget, you have a discussion board this week. We'll be focusing on setting. And as always, your journal entry about one of the texts that we've read. If you have any questions or concerns, just let me know, and happy reading.